Welcome to Chapter a Day. We're reading from this book, Here If You Need Me by Kate Braestrup. The stories that she has written about her experience of the sudden death of her husband and going to seminary and then becoming a chaplain to the Maine Warden Service. This is Chapter 2. With perhaps another 15 years to go before he could retire from his job as a trooper for the Maine State Police, my husband, James Andrew Drew Griffith, was already planning a second career as a Unitarian Universalist minister. He imagined himself serving a church and working as a law enforcement chaplain on the side. He could respond to crime scenes and search scenes, perform death notifications, and help families and officers cope with the spiritual and emotional dimensions of the work he was all too familiar with in his current occupation. Earnest, intelligent, brave, and tender, Drew would have made a great minister. According to our plan, I would have gone on writing, but I would also be a minister's wife. It would have been a fine life. One morning, in April 1996, my alarm clock went off. My husband grunted, turned over, and reached for me. For a half hour we snoozed and twined, a caduceus of warm, familiar flesh, until the backup alarm clock on his side of the bed rang, the dogs appeared at the bedside, and a child began to stir in the next room. 2 hours after this, the sheets still tangled and doubtless still holding the residual heat of his body as well as his scent. Downstairs, where I stood in the kitchen, Drew's cereal bowl was in the sink. White bowl, stainless steel sink. My husband's body at that moment lay along the front seat of his cruiser, his crew-cut head resting gently in the crook of his arm, just as if, his friend Tom would later tell me, he had decided to take a nap there in the lemon-colored sunlight of an April morning. I don't know, the sergeant said when I asked to be taken to the scene to see the body. In the local paper that very afternoon, there would be photographs showing the smashed Maine State Police cruiser and the back end of a paramedic protruding from the passenger side door. The front end of the paramedic, Peter Lammert, I know him, was trying to determine what, if anything, could be done to hold my husband's life in his body. There was nothing. The impact of a fully loaded box truck striking the driver's side of a car carries a force that neither the car door nor the body behind it is designed to withstand. By any ordinary measure, Drew died instantly. Death can be plausibly described as instantaneous, yet our cells have a certain autonomy. Only when the heart is stilled and the blood no longer streams effervescent with oxygen do the cells begin to shut down. It can take a while, 6 hours or more, for the last cellular outposts to flicker into darkness. For hours and only a mile or so from home, Drew's body lay on the driver's seat of his cruiser. One by one, or perhaps in clusters, his cells extinguished themselves. Finally, the driver's side door was cut away from where it held him in a grip both tenacious and tender. The crumpled metal did not bruise him. A little blood showed at the corner of his mouth, but nowhere else, I was told. He was loaded into a hearse and driven to the state medical examiner's lab in Augusta, and by that time it was, at last, accurate, even on the level of the microscopic, to refer to what was loaded as an it and not a him. I would go to the bridge only days later. There were skid marks on its asphalt surface. They began precisely where the truck collided with the car. They marked an instant in time as a point in space. When no cars were passing by, it was possible to hear the river, the moving air, the birds. It was possible to stand or place a hand or sink to my knees on that place amid the fragments of red and clear glass, the flecks of smoky blue paint, the bits of metal, where my husband's life came to an end. Love begins with the body. The love between Drew and me certainly did in any case. He was very handsome, although I didn't think so when we first met. He was a photographer then, not yet a police officer. He had a scraggly beard and longish hair. He exercised assiduously, which did not endear him to me. I fancied myself an intellectual at 21, and I believed attention to one's physique smacked of narcissism. Though riven by the same stupid combination of vanity and anxiety that most young women are prey to, I pretended an enlightened disinterest in the whole culture of physical perfection. I didn't shave my legs. I chopped off my own hair. For Drew's well-developed forearms, ridged abdomen, and the impressive spread of his latissimus dorsi, I had only condescension. In theory, anyway. But when he called to ask if I'd like to see a movie with him, I said yes. This could be described as mere lust, and lust was involved, of course, but lust is too diffuse. It will attach itself to punk rock drummers and English professors and wholly imaginary persons. Its real power is only acquired through specificity. I want not a body, but this body, this one here, Drew's body, his scent and heat, his scary strength, his warm mouth. Once he became a state trooper, Drew's professional life had an intimate physical aspect. He had to do brave and loving things to and with the bodies of others. Take, for example, those he arrested, particularly those who fought back, the ones he would have to wrestle with, the weight of his body pressing them into the ground, his mouth against an ear shouting instructions, "Give it up, give it up," as he groped beneath a sweaty belly for hands and weapons. Those bodies smelled of inadequate hygiene and nearly always of alcohol. When he had them safely handcuffed, he would help them up and cradle the backs of their heads in his palms so they wouldn't hurt themselves getting into his cruiser. Once he took the tiny hand of an abused 4-year-old girl who led him out back behind her house to show him where her father had chopped her puppy to pieces with an axe. Drew held the shape of that small hand in his palm for weeks. There were the bodies of those who, on receiving official police notification of a loved one's death, collapsed against his Kevlar-stiffened chest and wept. He would hold them gently and murmur, "It's all right, it's all right." His body was a tool of his trade, trained to the arcane demands of policing, the holds, takedowns, cuff and stuff, and CPR. So he lifted weights, bicycled, and ran long distances fast. His arms could press a lot of iron away from his chest. His heart was in superb condition, low blood pressure, cholesterol count in the peachy zone. His body became more beautiful with every passing year, something that after our 4 babies could not be said of mine. "You will always be beautiful to me," he would tell me, kissing me, and maybe I would have. He heard the book reviewed on National Public Radio, and so for my 31st birthday, my husband gave me a heavy tome entitled Death to Dust: What Happens to Dead Bodies by Kenneth Iserson, MD. I considered this a wildly romantic gift. Who but Drew would know how entranced I would be by such a book? I spent 2 weeks immersed in its pages, emerging at intervals to engage him in discussions of funereal arcana, organ donation, embalming, post-mortem cosmetics, the expense of coffins and urns, cremation, and so on. Iserson's primary ambition for the book was to increase the number of organ donors by enlightening readers to the impossibility of avoiding the mutilating effects of death, which, the claims of the funeral industry notwithstanding, are inevitable, even in the most thoroughly embalmed course. His secondary theme was that the care of a loved one's dead body was, until very recently, an intimate privilege, one now usurped by professionals. Modern culture does not encourage us, let alone require us, to take care of the bodies of our dead, any more than we are required to take care of our loved ones as they give birth or suffer or die. Instead, we are offered the expensive illusion that through a mortician's skills, the bodies of those we love will remain. There will be roses in their cheeks, chemicals in their systems, and thickly padded coffins to preserve those beloved limbs from the saprophytes that would otherwise claim them. Your loved one will never be dirt, they say. Isaacson recommends resisting this illusion. He advocates giving away undamaged organs to the needy living and caring for what remains personally, bathing the colorless face, arranging the stiffened limbs, choosing a garment, dressing the corpse. Dig the hole yourself if you can. Get the dust and ash on your own hands. After all, for thousands and thousands of years, ordinary people dealt with their own dead. Why is it that we have not evolved to tolerate and, in some sense, to actively require the experience of personally preparing and burying the bodies of those we love? My father, a former Marine, told me that part of the pledge Marines make is that no body is left on the field of battle. Semper fidelis. Even the dead are retrieved, sometimes at considerable risk to the living. Why bother to make such a pledge unless it is desirable that our bodies not fall into the hands of loveless strangers, even after our souls have departed? Will you take care of my body when I die? I shouted to Drew from my chair on the lawn where I read Dr. Isaacson's book and nursed our fourth baby under the willow tree. Drew was setting up the sprinkler for the older children to play in. Sure, honey, he answered, and I, like a Marine, felt distinctly braver. When the funeral director, Mr. Moss, arrived early Tuesday morning, I knew precisely what our preferences were when it came to the disposal of what Mr. Moss gently referred to as the remains. I am his remains, I thought. You may not embalm him, I said, not even a little bit, and no makeup either. He is to be cremated, and I would like to witness the cremation. Mr. Moss had spread pamphlets and a catalog with pictures of coffins across the dining room table. I didn't look at them. At that moment, Drew's body was being autopsied. Tests for systemic drugs and alcohol were performed, and all, unsurprisingly, came back negative. The chest cavity was opened, his lungs and good stout heart examined, the cause of death confirmed. Lacerations to the aorta, to the anterior vestibule of the heart, to the superior vena cava. Devastating injuries to all major internal organs which could not be harvested. The brain was removed, weighed, examined for defects that might have added complexity to the accident investigation. There were none. Drew would have wanted the cheapest possible coffin, I told Mr. Moss, provided it is also the one that will cremate most completely and with the least environmental impact. The cheapest coffin, which was essentially made of cardboard, turned out, by happy coincidence, to be covered with a nice state police blue fabric. That's perfect, I said. Good, Mr. Moss replied. And you want to attend the cremation? Yes, I said. In addition, I want to bathe and dress his body myself, and I will be the one who closes his coffin for the last time. You prefer to do the dressing and so forth to the body yourself? Mr. Moss said carefully, making sure. Yes, I said, I do. Stainless steel sink, a white bowl, and a stainless spoon bathed in the lemon yellow light of that morning. I picked up the spoon and put it in my mouth. It tasted of steel and milk. I wanted it to be warm. I wanted it to be Drew. My son Peter came into the kitchen. I reached for him, but he didn't come to me right away. Maybe Dad's been reincarnated already, he said. His voice was raw, fierce. Peter was 7. His father had been dead for 2 hours. Maybe Dad's a tiger. She wants to bathe and dress the body. She wants to what? She wants to bathe and dress the body. Oh, Jesus, herself? The discussion between the funeral director and higher-ups in the state police went on in this vein late into Tuesday evening and on into Wednesday morning. What were they afraid of? The same thing I was afraid of. The same thing any of us might be afraid of these days when birth and death are not processed in our homes by our own hands. We have no experience to guide us. I'm quite sure that from the outside, my desire to see and to care for my husband's body appeared unshakable. Looking back, I admit to doubts. What if my beloved's corpse disgusts me? What if seeing him and touching him makes it hurt more? Yet by instinct, as well as by a more intellectual conviction, I knew I had to walk up to that which would hurt me most. Drew's body, without Drew in it. I wanted to do it not because it would help me heal. Healing was both indefinable and unimaginable, but because it was the authoritative command of an authentic love. Tuesday night, I lay on Drew's pillow, in his smell, and did not sleep. His body would arrive at the funeral parlor the next morning. How could it possibly hurt more than this? Trooper Tom Ballard came to the house Wednesday morning to tell me that I would be permitted to tend to Drew's body. They want me to talk you out of it, he said soberly. I told them I've known you for a long time and that I've never been able to talk you out of or into anything, and neither has anyone else. Thank you, I said. So they said I should go with you, he continued, and Sergeant Drake and Sergeant Cunningham are coming with us too. All right. I'll go too, said my mother. At the funeral home, the door of the cool, ordinary room was opened, and there he was. He was dead. I will not lie, he looked dead. But it was comfort, joy, and sweet relief, not horror or pain, to see his body there. Drew lay on a white enameled steel table. He had one bruise on his right thigh. He wore the novelty Halloween boxer shorts our son Zachary had chosen for him, and a t-shirt over his chest, which was thickly bandaged. A neat tonsure of staples circled his scalp. His hands rested by his sides. My husband's smell was at home in our bed, and his white cereal bowl still in the sink. My husband had an incision in his chest, and the top of his head was held on by staples. My husband left himself 3 days before, 2 miles from this cool room. He was gone the instant the red and clear glass was shattering, flying, shining in the air. My husband might already have been reincarnated as a tiger. My love and Drew's began with latissimus dorsi and the ferocious desire that would have screwed us into one flesh but couldn't. He died. I lived. Like all the very best of loves, it could only have come to this. Tom, my mother, the 2 sergeants, and I dressed his body gently in a Class A Maine State Police uniform, crying a little but laughing a little too. It's absurdly difficult to put clothing onto a body that cannot cooperate. And what was there to do but imagine Drew's amusement at this necessary indignity and laugh with him? Then Sergeant Cunningham tenderly slid those cool bluish feet into boots shaped to fit exactly. He took the bootlaces between his fingers and tied them into crisp little bows with a practiced gesture that he must use with his own boots. To Drew's jacket, Tom pinned his badge and whistle. He buckled on the belt and a bandolier. I washed Drew's face with a soft, damp cloth. This is what Drew would have done for me, I thought, and in all the time that I shall live without him, time roaring and tumbling at me like some merciless black avalanche, I will be able to tell myself that I bore our love with my own hands all the way to this last hard place. Semper Fidelis, I told him, washing him tenderly around the mouth and jaw and closed eyes, then smoothing his hair with my hand. Leaving the cool room where Drew's body lay was harder than it was to enter it. That's the end of chapter 2.